This is our streetscape facade that we're going to draw now. As is the case with every drawing, we start with a quick look to identify any particular issues or areas of concern or things we need to be aware of so that we can organise how we're going to draw it. The first thing I do is I look at my alignment of the facade. Are all the walls at the same level? Quite clearly here, no, they're not. We have these bow window sections coming out in this first building and then also in this second building. I also like to have a good look at the perspective angles and to make sure there's nothing unusual happening with them, but these are all quite straightforward. So we have these strong perspective angles here, and we have here, and then in here, and in this building as well. And they continue up into the roofline area. But there is a nice consistency with these angles across the two buildings, so it's important that I capture those, that it doesn't look as though there's a different set of perspective rules for this building and then a different set for this building, as if they had two different eye levels and vanishing points. Is there anything in front of them which I want to draw in front of them, and therefore, because I'm drawing directly in ink, that I need to preserve the space? And I've got this light, and I've got this light here, and I've got some trees at street level. So I need to pay attention when I'm in the areas affected by those. Another consideration, is there anything I'm going to omit from my drawing or change slightly for the sake of a better drawing? And I think I'm actually going to shift this light pole slightly to the left so that it's not right on the corner of the building. I think visually it'll be a little more interesting if it's not on the same vertical line. And lastly, I need to consider which pens am I going to use? How thick is my line going to be, and will I use the same pen for the whole drawing? And that partly depends on how much detail I want to draw. If my line is too thick, then my drawing is going to end up looking a bit inky and blobby and heavy. Sometimes the weight of the line can actually overwhelm the subject. So there is quite a lot of detail, particularly in this building, which I do want to capture. So I'm going to use a 0.3 for this building, and I might use a 0.2 for this one just to give it a slightly lighter feel. And I'll do this tree in 0.3. I might do these lamps, which are quite a bit closer than all the other objects, in a 0.5 just to make them sit forward a bit and help create a three-dimensional sense. And similarly, I might do these foreground rails in a 0.5, but we'll see how it's looking when we get to that. I've got my 0.3 millimeter fine liner, and I'm going to start with this section here and then expand outwards to draw this section in more detail. And that will give me, I think, a good basis then for aligning things that go above and below and also that align along. You'll see me using my pen to measure my perspective angles from my reference photo onto my drawing. I don't want to get too bogged down in the detail. My technique is to draw the effect of the detail rather than the actual detail. And I do need to pay attention to make sure that I allow this space. So I might do something I've never done before. And I'm going to stick that there just to remind me, let's go. So almost 15 minutes in, and this is what I like to do: create a reasonably accurate small part of my scene that I can now use to measure everything else off. I don't know, just at the very last thing I did there, I thought this line sloped that way too much. So I just increased it with a line that's more in the correct place. Of course, that alteration won't be noticed in all the lines at the end of this. Notice also that I held off bringing my lines right to the lamppost just to give a little sense of this is in front of that. I think visually that works really nicely. So now I'm going to continue down with some more of this facade. So we've now gone into the second half of this first facade for the section that we've drawn. And I've done what I tend to do if I'm not paying enough attention, which is I've let this foreshortening slide out a bit much. So I'm a little bit too wide here for my reference. I could adjust the overall scale of the drawing to make that a little less obvious, but I'll try and bring it back in. I actually think I'm going to work at completing this part and this roof line here so that I have a better sense of the scale and of the line work before I go to this further section. So I'm getting closer to finishing this first building, which is where the lion's share of the time will be spent. But I have managed to get my running away facade back under control and pull it back slightly this way. So I'll now finish this roof, maybe add a few details here, and then we'll work on this building. So here we have the closest part of our facade complete. And while I'm going to come back to my 0.3mm pen to do this tree and this lamppost, I'm switching now to my 0.2mm pen to start on this second building. And I align the features of this building with the first as much as possible. But because they are two separate buildings, it's more important that I get the features looking right on this building as this building. With this second building, however, it's more important that the perspective angles match the first building I've drawn than they match what is actually in the reference. So with the bulk of the drawing done now, the question remains, how do I complete the bottom section? And as much as I would love to leave out all of these long straight lines and these cars and whatnot, I do feel it works rather well as a closure point for the drawing down here. So let's give it a go. And I'll switch back to my 0.3, I think. Here we have our drawing, I think finished. What are my thoughts? Oh look, parts of the facade are a little bit wobbly. I like the way this foliage contrasts with the architecture. I like the way this tree up here allowed me to hide my mistake in the roofline there. I'm still not sure about this rail. It may just now cut everything off a little too strongly. I suspect that when we look at this now, we actually see the rail first and then we look behind it to see the building. I'm not sure that's the effect I wanted. I think I still wanted the feeling of looking at the facade first and then maybe dropping down, which I think is what happens with this real life scene. Does anyone recognize it? I'll give you a clue. Vienna. What do you think? Do you think it would have been better without these rails down here? Let me know in the comments. Do you agree with me, or do you think it finishes off the scene nicely at the bottom? Also note that how as I moved along the facade, I was drawing with a lighter and lighter touch. There is less detail here in the windows than here, and certainly less than here. This drawing took me around 2 hours to do. Possibly we'll look at applying marker tone to it in another video. I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this interesting and helpful. I'll see you next time. Bye.